Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna, and this is episode number 240 of this icy yet spicy podcast for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. In this episode, we're here to talk about some playoffs. Playoffs? Yes, that is right, my filthy casual listeners out there. We're here to talk about the 2024-25 NFL playoffs that go down this coming weekend as the road to the Super Bowl, the road to New Orleans, begins this coming weekend with Super Wildcard Weekend. Yes, Super Wildcard, Ultra Wildcard. Look at this freaking wildcard, pal. Yes, the road to the playoffs, the road to the Super Bowl begins in the playoffs with, it all starts with Super Wildcard Weekend. So we're here to talk about the beginning of the playoffs, which begin, like I said, for however many times I said it now, Super Wildcard Weekend in this little filthy casual preview to the first round of the 2024-25 NFL playoffs. We're going to be looking at all the games that are going down this coming weekend, giving you my preview, the road to the playoffs for each and every team, giving you my picks, my predictions, and all the good stuff in this episode. Before we get started, though, make sure you follow Very Cold Lasagna on social media, where I'm at Very Cold Lasagna. And for all my audio listeners out there, wherever you're listening to, whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, continue to do so and make sure to rate the show, whether it's 1 to 5 stars. And for all my YouTube watchers out there, make sure to smash the like button. And if you're not already, smash the subscribe button, which you should, by the way. Turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified of each and every new episode that comes out. And leave your takes down below in the comments section and let me know who you're going with, specifically in this episode, in the playoffs. Who's going to go past the first round and into the divisional playoffs. So let me know about that in the comments below. And as always, share this with your friends, share this with your neighbors, share this with a stranger, share this with your coworkers, whether it's at work or school. Share the good, the bad, the ugly about this podcast for all the filthy casual fans out there, entitled Very Cold Lasagna. So that being said, let's talk about Super Wildcard Weekend. Super Wildcard, Ultra Wildcard. Look at this freaking wildcard, pal. So what is NFL Super Wildcard Weekend? For all the non-sports fans or the super filthy casual sports fans out there. So let me try to break it down for you. Let me try to define it for you. Let's try to lay a little groundwork before we even get talking about the slate of games that are going to go down on what I like to think of the real NFL season. It's the real NFL season, like after the NFL season. Think of this as the Christmas after Christmas. But anyway, so what is the NFL wildcard round? So the NFL wildcard round, it's the first round of the NFL playoffs. So it's kind of like your little single elimination tournament, in a sense. So the NFL wildcard round is the first round of the NFL playoffs for the teams that failed to grab the number one seed in each conference. So there's two conferences. There's the AFC, the American Football Conference, and the NFC, the National Football Conference. So you have the other seeds 2 to 7 in each conference. They play each other in different matchups spread throughout the weekend, so Saturday to Monday. So you got seeds 2 to 7, 3 to 6, and 4 to 5, 4 versus 5, both on each side of the bracket. So the winners of those matchups each advance to the next round of the playoffs, which are the divisional playoffs, which is the quarterfinals. It's the quarterfinals of the playoffs. And then you have the conference championships, which I presume are the semifinals of the NFL playoffs. And then, of course, you got the Super Bowl, which are the finals. So that being said, that brings us to, of course, this weekend. Super Wildcard Weekend. Super Wildcard. Ultra Wildcard. Look at this freaking wildcard, pal. So, yeah, as I noted too earlier, the number one seed in each conference, they get a bye week. So they get a bye week. They get a week of rest to recover from injuries or, lounge for a week to check out the competition of who they're going to play. Most of the time, it's the lowest remaining seed in both the AFC and the NFC. So, like, for example, the 7th seed or the 6th seed, whoever that may be, the lowest remaining seed in both the AFC and the NFC gets the prize, usually, of facing the top seed in either conference. That's on, like I said, that's on that week-long break. Then everyone else is reseeded based on who's the higher seed. So, yeah, that is the definition of the NFL wildcard round, the first round in the NFL playoffs. So, now that I defined it for you, let's get into the slate. Let's get into these matchups coming up on this edition of the NFL Super Wildcard Weekend, the 2024/2025 edition. And yeah, some people give me flack of like, oh, wait a minute, it's not 2024. Well, technically it is, because, well, this is the 2024 edition, by the way. It's the 2024 season. But statistically aside, cherry picking aside, let's get into the actual slate. Let's get into our filthy casual slate of the 2024 Super Wildcard Weekend around the NFL. And it all begins. The NFL playoffs begin on Saturday. In the afternoon, on CBS, it's mainly all AFC. It begins, the playoff portion begins with the AFC side of things, with the LA Chargers as the 5 seed taking on the 4-seeded and AFC South champion Houston Texans. So these two teams didn't meet each other in the regular season, but what's compelling about this matchup is the quarterback battle. You have Justin Herbert, who got drafted in 2020, so the fourth-year quarterback for the LA Chargers, going up against the second-year quarterback for the Houston Texans in CJ Stroud. So both of these quarterbacks are top 10 draft picks in the NFL in their respective NFL drafts, and they're colliding with each other for the first time ever. So this is going to be a fun matchup between two very good quarterbacks, and they come with very interesting stories. So for the LA Chargers, looking at their season that was, they probably had a very good turnaround from the year prior and up to now, because when you looked at their 2023, they had a very bad season. They ended at 5-12, and mainly is because, well, their coach sucked, Brandon Staley. Coming off that playoff choke from 2 years ago against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and for whatever reason, they decided to keep him and Tom Telesco, and, well, they went through a season of more choking in 2023. And yeah, they were fired near the end of last season, and they decided to bring in a new regime. The Chargers hired former Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh, fresh off of winning a college football national championship, and yeah, they also brought in a former Ravens director of player personnel Joe Horowitz as their new head coach general manager duo. Interesting enough for the Chargers, Jim Harbaugh, last coach in the NFL, even over a decade ago with the San Francisco 49ers, last in 2014. So it was going to be a little bit of a transition for Jim Harbaugh, because when he last coached in the NFL a decade ago, things were a lot different. So there's going to be some adjusting for Harbaugh, coming back from college and then back into the NFL. So they bring in these pieces with your agency in the draft, and then when you go into the regular season, well, things took a little while for Jim Harbaugh to obviously adjust, and then the Chargers to adjust to his coaching. They eventually started playing better on both sides of the ball, even if they didn't quite have the most appealing of weapons around Justin Herbert. But they won enough games with a rebound year from Justin Herbert, and then you get a strong rookie year from their first round pick, Ladd McConkey at receiver, and they had a physical running game as well as a better defense. So they almost closed the gap on Kansas City in the AFC West, but just wasn't quite enough. They got swept in the division by the Chiefs, but they still managed to nab their second playoff appearance in 3 years. And compare that to being 5-12, dead last in the division, and then turn it around you go 11-6, second in division. Hey, that's still pretty good. And they're currently riding hot on offense. So, yeah, the Chargers are pretty much riding the momentum right now going to the playoffs. Then you have the Houston Texans. The Texans coming off their best season in 5 years and what was pretty much an unexpected turn of events because they were supposed to be rebuilding last year. Coming off what I thought was a funny ending to their 2022 when Lovie Smith, their previous head coach, gave them the big FU to the Texans organization, saying, "You're gonna fire me. Well, I'm gonna give you one last parting gift, and that is fucking them over the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft." But nonetheless, they still managed to get the quarterback that they wanted in the 2023 draft. They managed to get C.J. Stroud, and they managed to hire the coach that they wanted, and that was DeMeco Ryans, formerly of the San Francisco 49ers. And like I said, last year was supposed to be a rebuilding year, the first of however many rebuilding years for the Houston Texans. And surprisingly, that duo of Stroud and DeMeco Ryans, it got off to a very strong start. And CJ Stroud performed well above expectations. And yeah, that led to the Texans gaining their first AFC South title in quite some time at 10-7. And they went as far as the divisional playoffs. They managed to beat Cleveland in the first round of the playoffs, becoming the first rookie QB and coaching duo to do so. And yeah, they lost to the Baltimore Ravens, but when you looked at that Texans team, the future was pretty bright for them. They played much better than many had hoped. And when you went into this recent season, they were obviously the preseason favorite to win a division, even though you had Jacksonville, you had Indianapolis there with their quarterbacks. But not only that, they were one of the preseason, at least at most, AFC title favorites. And considering how well they performed halfway through the season, they were 5-1. They seemed well on their way to doing it. But even though they won the AFC South again, they suffered through a lot of injuries. Specifically, especially on offense. They lost their top receivers, Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. They were lost for the season with torn ACLs. And then CJ Stroud went through a kind of steep and slow regression as the weeks wore on. And that greatly started to affect the Texans' hopes of making it to the AFC Championship game. So they managed to lose 6 of their last 10 games, and, well, here they are, slugging through the playoffs. Sure, they won a Week 18 game, but it's just like, it was against the Titans, man. So, yeah, they went 10-7 again, but it's just like, boy, the Texans are kind of cold right now. So when you look at this matchup between both teams, yeah, it's I don't know. It's like an opposite spectrum. You know, the Chargers are coming in hot. The Texans, okay, yeah, they're coming off a win, but they didn't play under the starters, and they played against a bad team that has the number 1 overall pick, being Tennessee. So when you look at the biggest key to victory, what's going to be the biggest thing that either team will need to advance to the next round? So when you look at the Chargers, and what they need to move on, I'd say it's that front 7. Again, this is just my opinion. This is just like what I personally see. My filthy casual take on what either team, all the teams that I'm gonna be talking about, that are gonna have to do to move on to the next round. Now it could be like one particular thing that you have, but that's okay. We all have our opinions here. But anyway, I think it's the Chargers. In their front 7, the front 4, the linebacking core, and I feel like they have to really challenge CJ Stroud. Like CJ Stroud can really escape the pocket, but especially with an offensive line that has been just beaten up with injuries right now, and it could quickly collapse, especially without some of their starters, like Laramie Tunsil, for example. So I feel like this is a matchup that the likes of Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, and Poona Ford, it has to really attack this beaten up O-line in order to collapse the pocket, keep CJ Stroud in it, and then yeah, keep him in there so they can sack his butt. And they have to make sure that they don't let him escape the lines or get him to run out of the pocket for positive gains. So the Chargers front seven, they have to make sure C.J. Stroud stays within the pocket. Meanwhile, for the Texans, that secondary has to minimize Herbert's best weapon, Ladd McConkey. And I know they have other weapons too, but Ladd McConkey is probably the best weapon on this Chargers offense because he has great route running, and his ability after the catch, it's really good, and it's probably the one of the big things in why the Chargers are winning right now, especially helping Justin Herbert rebound after a pretty bad year last year. So who's drawing that assignment for the Houston Texans? It's the corner Kamari Lassiter. So he's drawing that assignment, and he's been, I'd say, okay-ish for the Texans, but he's gonna have to be better than okay. So Kamari Lassiter, on McConkey, if he can really lock down on McConkey, it's gonna force Justin Herbert to try and go to the other weapons on offense, especially the inconsistent Quinn Johnson. So when you look at this matchup for both of these teams, I know I might be doubting the Texans here. And, they seem like when you look at it from a filthy casual perspective, you might be looking at the Texans and with how good their offense is. And especially when you consider Nico Collins, he's been a really good receiver too, but they're just too beaten up. They're just too beaten up on offense. Their offensive line is missing half of their starters, and there's not really a vertical threat other than Nico. So I feel like the Chargers will physically impose their will. They'll physically threaten the Texans, and it should still be a fun matchup because look at it. C.J. Stroud versus Justin Herbert. That's a very interesting matchup between two young quarterbacks. But I do think Jim Harbaugh will coach his way to his first playoff win in 10 years. So I feel like the Chargers will move on to the next round. So in the second matchup of the day for Saturday is another AFC playoff matchup, and it's a 3-match in a division, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 6 taking on the 3rd-seeded Baltimore Ravens, the AFC North division champions. And like I said, this is a 3-match of the division series where both teams split their home matchups this season, and this one is broadcast only on Amazon Prime Video for that Jeff Bezos money, pal, of $15.99. $15.99 a month, pal. Is that what Amazon Prime costs nowadays? I don't know. Might be more. Might be less. But either way, this is the first NFL playoff game. The second NFL playoff game on streaming exclusively. Last year was Peacock. Now you get it on Amazon Prime Video for that Jeff Bezos money, pal. So looking at the season that was for the Pittsburgh Steelers, it looked like the roles were going to be reversed. The roles were going to be reversed for this matchup. But looking back at the season that was for Pittsburgh, but leading into this season, they had to restart at quarterback. Not just one quarterback, 2 quarterbacks this offseason. They traded away Kenny Pickett to the Philadelphia Eagles. They let Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky go in free agency. So they bring in Justin Fields from the Chicago Bears via trade. And they also bring in Russell Wilson via free agency, who Russell Wilson came in right away after being released from Denver with that big fat salary cap charge that Denver's still eating. But nonetheless, they're in this quarterback competition, and then Fields actually ends up winning it because of an injury that Russell Wilson picked up. So Fields starts the first half of the year, and he does, I'd say, decently well with the offense, and the offense does decently well with him under center. But then by the time you get to week 7, Mike Tomlin felt like there was a change. A change was needed for this offense to spice it up a bit. And so he made the switch to Russell Wilson when they faced the New York Jets in that Sunday night game. And when you get to that Sunday night game against the Jets, Russell Wilson, he started off strong in that game. And he wanted to start strong moving forward for at least that first month. And then by the time you get to December, they were still riding high. with the AFC North lead. But then after they lost to the Philadelphia Eagles, that's when they started to get a little exposed because Russell Wilson and the rest of that offense, they started to really struggle. And that led to a defense that has been really good for the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's been really reliable. They had to perform so well, but they crumbled under the pressure of the expectation of having to carry that team. So as a result, the Steelers, who started off strong at 8-2, by the time they get to December, they fell apart last month, all month long. And eventually, once they met the Ravens again in their rematch, they collapsed. And eventually they lost the AFC North to Baltimore, and that's where we are now. So speaking of the Baltimore Ravens, they headed into this campaign looking to right the wrong from falling just short of winning the AFC Championship game against Kansas City. And this is despite being the number 1 seed in the conference. So they were looking to bounce back and looking to right the wrong this time and make the Super Bowl. But it didn't start off pretty. They got off to a disappointing 0-2 start, losing to the Chiefs by a foot, and then they lost to the Las Vegas Raiders in their home opener. But they managed to rebound, winning 5 straight thanks to new free agent acquisition Derrick Henry, bringing balance to the offense and helping Lamar Jackson, who in turn became an even bigger dual threat quarterback. Eventually, others came along like Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. They also shook off their slow starts to the year to become featured contributors for Lamar. So, of course, the biggest question mark, though, that could derail their Super Bowl hopes was a defense. A defense that lost some of their key players last offseason in free agency, and then it also lost their top coordinator in Mike McDonald because he went on to Seattle to become their new head coach. So they replaced him with this new coordinator, Zach Orr, and it took a long while to adjust to his scheme. And as a result, they gave up a bunch of yards, they gave up a bunch of big plays, they gave up a lot of points, nearly every game. But after the bye week, which was very late, they tightened up. And was it a good time for them to tighten up with the playoffs right around the corner? Because the defense, especially in the passing defense, they were very good in coverage. They're very good coverage now. They allowed fewer than, I believe, 20 points compared to before that. And the offense was playing with a lot more consistency now. And everyone was contributing too, aside from the key guys. So they stole the AFC North from the free-falling Steelers, and they finished the season at 12-5 as the 3rd seed. And again, it led to this 3-match between these AFC North rivals. So one key thing to look out for this matchup is one of Baltimore's top weapons, Zay Flowers, is not playing in this game. He suffered a knee sprain last week against the Cleveland Browns in the game that clinched the AFC North for the Baltimore Ravens. So one of their top receivers, Zay Flowers, not being there is kind of a big blow to the Ravens passing game. And it puts pressure on their other weapons to really step up for Lamar. So when you're looking at the biggest key to victory for both of these teams, starting with the Ravens, and this goes back to the injury to Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, who's hasn't exactly had the biggest years like since being drafted by them in 2021. He's having the best career year now, but without Zay Flowers, he's got to step up. He's got to step up when his number is called, and he has to deliver with Lamar. And of course, you also have to have Mark Andrews, and I would like to see Isaiah Likely get increased playing time as well. Meanwhile, when you look at the Steelers, they've been ice cold in the last month since losing to the Philadelphia Eagles. And even when George Pickens, their top receiver, when he returned to the lineup a week after they lost to the Eagles, it didn't make a difference. Like, nothing changed about this offense. So Russell Wilson in this Steelers offense, whether they're running the ball or passing the ball, they need to put on their best performance because it's when they're done in the playoffs. Like, Russell Wilson needs to make better, quicker throws, got to make smarter decisions. They also have to take some chances downfield. I mean, they have been doing that, admittedly, but they have to make sure that they're making the right chances downfield. And everyone needs to catch the ball upon targeted, because last game against Cincinnati, they were dropping balls, especially Pickens in the last game. So there's a lot going on in this rematch, this very intense division rivalry between two hated rivals. But when you look at it, when you look at how both teams are playing right now, I'm going to go with the Baltimore Ravens, because they're firing on all cylinders on both sides of the ball compared to the Steelers, where they're pretty ice cold on offense. And when you look at what's under the radar right now, is going back to that defense. They've improved in the last month, especially after the bye week. They've limited their opponents to 20 or fewer points, in contrast to where they were prior to their bye week, very late bye week, allowing more than that, and they've managed to get to the quarterback more frequently. So I feel like that defense is going to be a big difference maker. I mean, of course, their offense will hopefully light it up for them, but I feel like the Ravens will pull away from this victory against the Steelers in this rematch. So looking at the Sunday slate of games, starting with an early morning matchup on CBS, and wraps up the AFC side of things as the 7th-seeded Denver Broncos take on the 2-seeded and AFC East champion Buffalo Bills. Now, these two teams didn't meet in the regular season, but this meeting marks the first playoff appearance for Denver since their Super Bowl win in 2015, when Peyton Manning won this Super Bowl. At least helped win the Super Bowl for his team, and pretty much rode off into the sunset. And since then, it's been a massive struggle for Denver to get back to this point. But here they are once again. Finally back into the fold after 9 years. And, well, how exactly did they get here? So let's take a look back at the season that was for the Denver Broncos as a 7th seed. So last year, at this point in time, they missed the playoffs once again when they had an opportunity to do so. With 2 weeks left to go in the season, they decided to bench Russell Wilson. And we eventually found out why they decided to bench Russell Wilson. And when we get to the offseason, they released him. Because, well, they just decided that this wasn't working anymore. After making a big trade to go and get Russell Wilson from Seattle, well, I mean, he underperformed. He underperformed in the Mile High. And after two seasons with him, they decided to move on. So despite having to deal with the big dead cap hit for however many seasons that they signed Russell Wilson to that big fat contract, the Broncos decided that it's time for a new quarterback. And they turned to the draft. They used their 12th overall pick to select Oregon's Bo Nix, who had some potential, but we didn't know exactly what he'd be like in the NFL, just like with many other quarterbacks. So they're still hoping that Bo Nix finally be the answer to their long-term quarterback problem that they've been having since, Peyton Manning retired. So Nix would win the starting job over Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson, but it would take half of the season for Sean Payton to let him loose. He basically put him on a training program. And during this training program, the team won their games, but it was mainly because of a strong defense led by Nick Bonito and Patrick Surtain II. Sure, you would get some flashes of Bo Nix and his potential of what it can be, but Sean Payton was still, letting him do whatever Sean Payton was trying to instill in his training. But eventually, Bo Nix would finally be unleashed, and that started with an upset blowout win against the Falcons, where he had his first of a couple best performances, and he would flash his strong arm ability and mobility as the offense finally started to become a threat, and started to finally balance things out on the team. And slowly but surely, they eventually inched closer to finally getting a long overdue playoff spot. And towards the end of the season, they had 3 attempts to do such, but now they lost all 3 of them, but they finally managed to do it in the last week of the season, beating on a bunch of Kansas City Chiefs B squad people to secure the last playoff berth and their first, like I said, since their Super Bowl run in 2015. So Denver has finally made the dance. But as their reward, they're taking on a Buffalo Bills team that many expect to at least make it to the AFC Championship game. So the season that was for the 2-seeded Buffalo Bills. The Bills underwent a roster shift in the offseason after once again coming up short against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the AFC Divisional. After another AFC Divisional exit for, the third straight season. So the Bills front office decided that, okay, it's time for a change. It was time to undergo a roster shift. They traded away Stephon Diggs. They released some of their older key players like Jordan Poyer. And that left some question marks on whether they would lose their grip on the AFC East. So they replaced the old guard with a couple of younger pieces. And rather than losing their grip on the division, they actually managed to get better. That was because Josh Allen played at an MVP level, with rookies and other role players gradually stepping up. Notably James Cook and rookie receiver Keon Coleman in this new sharing offense where almost everyone gets a piece of the pie. They didn't really have a number one receiver, a number one running back, nothing. Everyone was just sharing the wealth in this team. So as the rest of the AFC East was, crumbling against each other, the Bills would go on to once again win the division undeterred and nab the second seed once again. So, yeah, I know some people are ready to crown the Bills as the unquestioned winner in this matchup. And we'll get to my prediction in just a bit, but don't overlook Denver. Don't overlook the Broncos in this matchup, because I feel like, some people say, oh, this is a blowout, but be careful. This might be a little closer than you think, despite the clear experience edge over Denver that the Bills will have. So looking at the biggest key to victory for both of these teams, with Denver, Bo Nix needs to attack downfield, and he's got to play the biggest game of his life in this very early NFL life. The Bills, the passing defense, it's a clear weakness. It's pretty beatable, especially if that offensive line that Denver has, it can hold up for Bo Nix. And if Nix can escape the pocket when pressure breaks down, then I feel like that'll be his big opportunity to connect with a Marvin Mims or a Cortland Sutton or whoever. Whichever receiver is open for Bo Nix, then he should go after it and attack that Bills passing defense that is kind of a weakness for them, especially when he goes deeper downfield, which has been Bo Nix's biggest strength, but also his biggest flaw, one of his biggest flaws because of his interceptions. So I feel like when you go attack the safeties, Taylor Rapp and DeMar Hamlin, I feel like that's where Bo Nix should attack. And that's where also Marvin Mims and Cortland Sutton, those receivers, that's where they should get open for Bo Nix. So attacking this secondary again for the Denver Broncos against the Bills, that's a key thing that the Denver Broncos can expose if they want to have a chance in this game. And then for the Bills, this front seven, they got to create turnovers on Bo Nix. I mean, we can say all we want about Josh Allen and what they can do to attack this Denver defense, but I feel like the key is that Bills defense in that front seven. If that secondary is not going to be able to stop Bo Nix, then that front seven's got to be able to get after him and create some turnovers up front. Because Bo Nix has been good, but he also frequently gives the ball away, especially in the air. So they got to create a lot of pressure up front, especially in the front four, the pass rush, to force Bo Nix into some major mistakes. And especially if one of those major mistakes ends up changing the game in favor of the Bills. So, like I said, this is a game that people are like, oh, the Bills will take care of it handily, but I would watch out in this matchup. And even though I say all these things, I still think the Bills will come out on top, just not in the way that most people are saying. I feel like this will be one of those matchups that people will fly under the radar. But I do think that the Denver Broncos will give the Bills a run for their money in this one. But again, don't discredit Sean Payton for what he's done with the development of Bo Nix and finally getting the team back into the playoffs. But yeah, unfortunately, the Broncos story of this season just ends with Josh Allen because that team will just be too much for Denver to overcome. So now looking at the NFC side of things, which begins on Fox as the 7th-seeded Green Bay Packers take on the 2-seeded and NFC East champion Philadelphia Eagles. So this is a rematch from their Week 1 meeting all the way back in September, which was in Brazil on Peacock for whatever forsaken reason, but I digress. So the Eagles won that matchup in Brazil, 34-29, in a tightly contested contest. So looking at both of these teams, and for the Packers, the season that was for them, the Packers at this point last year, they were a team that surprised many. They had an unexpectedly successful season last year at 9-8. At this time last year, the Packers beat up on the Dallas Cowboys in the first round of the playoffs, the 2-seeded Cowboys, and they almost upset the top seed San Francisco 49ers to go to the NFC Championship game. They fell just short, just a tad bit short of doing such, but they learned so much from that game. They learned so much, and the future was bright for that team. They were the youngest team in the NFL under Matt LaFleur, and they didn't really need to add or subtract anyone in the offseason. So they were pretty much going in this season with the same amount of players, and just taking what they learned from their playoff run and hoping that they would have even better success this past year, especially considering that they re-signed Jordan Love to this big fat contract. So the offense would have even better success thanks in part to another good year from Jordan Love, despite him battling injuries and him having a rough turnover streak of, him throwing an interception every single game up until, I think it was week 12, where he snapped that streak. And the offense would be greatly helped also because they added former Raiders running back Josh Jacobs, who, again, greatly helped Jordan Love as well. And then defensively, they did well too because of the additions of Giant safety Xavier McKinney, and yeah, that Packers defense has been pretty good, although their weakness still remains the secondary. And then despite their improved success and getting a second straight playoff berth, it would only net them the 7th seed because of just how competitive the NFC North was. But not only that, it's because they could only muster just one win in that division, and they lost two of those division games in the final 2 games of the year. They lost to the Vikings, and they lost in an upset to the Bears. Rough. That's just rough. They went 1-5 in the division, and yeah, for people saying, "Oh, it's like reseed the playoffs, please." I mean, you can at least win your division games at least first. So that's the story of the Packers in 2024. They're a 7th seed once again, but they did improve on the record. But it's just kind of crazy. A 12-win team beat a 7th seed. That's pretty insane when you think about it. So looking at the 2-seeded Philadelphia Eagles, the NFC East champions, they were not this way a year ago. They were a 5 seed, they were a wild card, and they were coming off a humiliating wild card loss in Tampa Bay. So Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman made numerous changes last offseason, which included replacing their coordinators, the new coordinators were Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, and they addressed the problematic passing defense in both free agency and the draft. And all this was in hopes of returning back to the Super Bowl. But things didn't get off to a good start. They started off 2-2, and they got their butts whooped in those 2 losses. And after their second loss in a rematch with Tampa Bay, Eagles fans were calling for Nick Sirianni's job. They were calling for him to get fired. But the Eagles would turn it around, win 10 straight games afterwards, and in that 10-game winning streak, they started playing better. Slowly but surely, though. But nonetheless, they eventually adjusted to their new coordinators to make themselves one of the NFC's top teams, especially defensively, under new coordinator Vic Fangio. And then when you look at the offense, that they played much better too, especially when Jalen Hurts is passing the ball, of course, throwing the ball to his guys A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. But when you have a running game that now consists of former Giants running back Saquon Barkley, who had a really big year, just behind Derrick Henry. No, he actually surpassed Derrick Henry this year as the top rushing back in the NFL. So, yeah, the Eagles had a really big year, a big bounce back year coming off of last year as the defending NFC champion, as the NFC champions from 2 years ago. And yeah, the Eagles would clinch the division in week 17 in a decisive win over the Cowboys. And going into this game, questions would remain over the availability of Jalen Hurts, who got knocked out in the game prior to the Dallas game with a concussion. So, yeah, there was questions remaining for both teams with regards to injuries and all that stuff. So, starting with the Packers, their Week 18 game against Chicago, they had to play all their starters because seeding was on the line, and they did not look particularly good in that Week 17 matchup against the Vikings. So they played all their starters, but it came at a cost because Jordan Love, he left the game in the first half with an elbow injury, but he said he's good to go. He said he should be okay with an elbow injury, but unfortunately, Christian Watson, he didn't come out very good. One of their top receivers, he left what ended up being with a torn ACL. So that's a big blow to the Packers receiving core. No matter how deep that group is, that young receiving group, no matter how deep it is, it's a big blow. Watson is Love's go-to deep threat. So they're going to have to turn to other people in that group, whether it's Romeo Doubs, Devontae Wicks, Tucker Kraft. Like, Jordan Love is have to go to all of his options because Christian Watson was like the significant deep threat, and now he's gone for the year and potentially next year. That's a brutal blow. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts, it's more of a positive thing for the Eagles because it looks like he's on track to play. He hasn't played in the last 2 weeks though, but he was recently a full participant in practice. So as long as he clears concussion protocol, it sounds like he'll be back in time for the playoff game. So looking at the biggest key to victory for both of these teams, considering that the Packers won't have Christian Watson and that impacts their receiving depth. I mean, they'll still look to pass, but they should heavily use Josh Jacobs in this game. But the thing is, they shouldn't abuse it. They can use it, but don't abuse it. And especially considering that Jordan Love is entering this game at 50% health, even though he's fully practicing, I think they have to go head on with Josh Jacobs and make him the focal point of this offense. Again, Matt LaFleur should use Josh Jacobs heavily, but don't abuse it against the strong Eagles running defense. Mix it up with Jacobs and then have Love throw some mid-range passes. And then meanwhile, for the Eagles, also go with the running game. Keep attacking with Saquon. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Especially with Jalen Hurts coming off a 2-week layoff with a concussion. So if Jalen Hurts is prone to rust, then keep feeding Saquon. It shouldn't be difficult for Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore to expose this Packers run defense, which is pretty weak. So with the Packers riding this 2-game losing skid and having key injuries to one of their top receivers and a quarterback that's entering this game 50%, I mean, this pick is probably a little easier for me to go with, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles. Jalen Hurts, he'll start off slow, because he's trying to ease himself back into the game after a 2-week layoff in the concussion protocol. So I feel like he'll ease himself back in to help smack the Pack out of the first round. So again, even if he doesn't, their very strong defense will, and so will Saquon. So yeah, that is the first NFC matchup. So let's move on to the next NFC matchup. That's going to be in prime time on NBC under the bright lights of Sunday night. And this is a matchup of interesting quarterbacks. The number 6 seeded Washington Commanders take on the 3 seeded NFC South champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this is a rematch from week number 1 in which the Tampa Bay Bucs beat the Commanders 37-20 in Jayden Daniels' first start. However, this is a much different Commanders team than the Bucs first saw all the way back at the beginning of the regular season. And obviously, this is a much different Bucs team than what the Commanders saw in week 1, whether it's for good or for bad. So starting with the Commanders, how did they get to this point? And well, they were much different than what we saw from where they are now a year ago, because this time last year they were 4-13, and they were just beginning an offseason for a full yet true rebuild. And this is under the new ownership of Josh Harris. This time last year, they got rid of Ron Rivera, head coach. They got rid of general manager Martin Mayhew. And during this long offseason, they brought in former Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn. And they decided to bring in 49ers executive Adam Peters as the new head coach general manager duo. So this marked the new beginning of the Washington Commanders. And then together, they aggressively turned over the roster. They had the fewest amount of returning players in this recent season. And one of those moves ended up being the drafting of LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels. And before and after drafting him, they added the necessary pieces around him, mainly the offensive line. So even with this retooling of the roster, not many had expectations on Washington in this first year of the actual rebuild. But man, were all of us in for something completely different about this team. Because Jayden Daniels, he got off to a slow start in the first 2 weeks, but when he had to watch that game in week 3 against the Cincinnati Bengals, he played very, very dang good in that primetime upset of the Bengals and Joe Burrow. He outplayed them in that game. It was like a stunner. You were about to see something special with Daniels, and then it was nothing but up from there for him and the Commanders. Daniels would lead the team to strong performances, even if some of them ended in defeat, and some of those few of those defeats should have been wins for the Commanders, admittedly, such as the Hail Maryland against the Bears, and then you had the game-winning drive in the second game against the Eagles. So collectively, the Commanders would double their record from last season at 12-5. They would get one of the playoff spots and their first playoff berth since 2020, that pandemic year when they won the division, and an overtime win against the Falcons. So this marks the Commanders' first playoff appearance since 2020, so about 4 years or so. And they're riding good right now. They're riding really good. Meanwhile, for the 3-seeded NFC South champion Tampa Bay Bucs, this time last year, they came up just short against the Lions in last year's divisional playoffs. So they were just a tad bit short of reaching the NFC Championship game against San Francisco. So they entered this year hoping to both repeat as division champions and get to the NFC Championship game. However, the team had a mid-season slump after starting 3-1, a slump that included being swept by Atlanta, a last-second loss to the 49ers, and they lost Chris Godwin to a dislocated ankle when they really could have avoided it when in a blowout loss to the Baltimore Ravens. So, nonetheless, with all that slumping going on, They went to a bye week. They recollected themselves, and they managed to finish the season winning the 6 of their last 7 games behind strong quarterback play from Baker Mayfield and the rushing duo of Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. So they finally had a running game going. And with all that being said, they kept pace with the Falcons in the NFC South and eventually stole the division from them in the last week of the season by beating the Saints. So when you're looking at this game between both teams, I'd say they're about evenly matched. They have a really good. They have 2 really good offenses. They're both evenly matched on offense, but I feel like the biggest key to victory for both of these teams, well, I'd say it's very similar. This game is going to come down to which defense is going to get that big stop or that big turnover, because neither of their defenses are really good, especially in the passing defense, the secondary, the back end, whatever you want to call it. So this game, I feel, has the potential for a shootout. Like, both these quarterbacks are riding hot right now, and if neither defense is going to be any good in this game, yeah, Jayden Daniels and Baker Mayfield are going to put on a show in this one. And if that's the case, then one of these teams' pass rushes is going to have to come in clutch. So I feel like if that's the case, I feel like Baker Mayfield has the very slight edge to come away against Jayden Daniels and help the Bucs pull away from this one, because he's been there before last year. So he knows what it's like to pull away, come in clutch, and pull off a game-winning drive against another NFL team that can pull in clutch. I mean, Jayden Daniels has had his clutch moments this year, but under the bright lights of Sunday night in a playoff environment, I feel like Baker Mayfield can deliver it more given his playoff experience, even if it's he's had 2 years of playoff experience, but nonetheless, at least he's had it over Jayden Daniels. So I feel like the Bucs will just barely get away with this one. Then we wrap up the Super Wildcard weekend slate with the Monday Night Wildcard game on ESPN and ABC, as the 5-seeded Minnesota Vikings take on the 4-seeded NFC West champion LA Rams in a rematch of their Week 8 meeting, which the Rams won 30-20. So, yeah, both of these teams, it's I'd say an interesting path for them. Especially when the Minnesota Vikings, as the 5 seed, it looked different for them in the last year, because when you looked at them at this point last year, they had a different quarterback, Kirk Cousins, who had been there for 5 years. They let him go to Atlanta in free agency. Well, even though he tore his Achilles midseason last year. So in response of letting Kirk Cousins go in free agency, they signed Sam Darnold to a 1-year deal while also drafting J.J. McCarthy from Michigan a month later. So it's going to be this quarterback competition between Darnold and McCarthy. But it ended up not being a competition because Sam Darnold would earn the starting role because McCarthy got hurt before preseason even began. And it ended this season, actually, with the leg injury. So Darnold becomes the starting quarterback by default, and he unexpectedly performed better than most people expected. Not even just better, the best he ever did in his career. He had really strong performances against playoff teams from last year, like the 49ers, the Texans, the Lions, even though he lost both games against them. Oh, no, in the first game at least. And then the Packers. So he had all these really strong performances against these playoff teams. And then you had a defense heralded by Brian Flores again. It was one of the best in the league with its aggressive nature in blitzing, physicality, creating turnovers. So they keep pace with the Lions in the NFC North race. They were 14-2 heading into a winner-take-all Sunday night matchup in Week 18, but they came up short. They looked like a mirrored version of how they performed all season long. So they came up well short of winning that game against Detroit, and they came up well short of winning the NFC North and the top overall seed in Week 18 in a tight season-long race. But I mean, hey, they still have one of the best seasons in team history at 14-3. But they just got to go and earn a potential Super Bowl berth the hard way now. Meanwhile, looking at the LA Rams and how their season went, the Rams looked to challenge for the NFC West and win it for the first time in 3 years, coming off a season where they made the playoffs last year but fell just short against the Detroit Lions. But it didn't get off to a pretty start for them. Injuries to their key players, notably Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and then you had multiple starters on the offensive line out. It put a dent to those hopes of winning the division. So you had multiple people out with injury, and it looked like it was going to be a lost season for the Rams. But after their bye week, they would win the majority of their games the rest of the way, albeit a little sloppy, but nonetheless, a win's a win. And they would also get healthy along the way. So that was despite an offense getting cold late in the season. You still had a young but talented defense led by rookies Jared Verse and Braden Fisk dominating opposing offenses to minimize their chances of scoring and advancing the ball downfield. So this really good defense was really helping out an offense that was getting cold at the wrong time. So the Rams seized control of the NFC West from the Seahawks via a tiebreaker, in a very weird one, by the way. But they would drop to the fourth seed after deciding it was a good idea to rest starters, even though there's still an opportunity to get the 3 seed. But that's neither here nor there. And yeah, they decided that being a 4 seed was the best idea. So going into this game, it's actually not going to be in Los Angeles because of the unfortunate situation that's going on with the fires over there. And I just hope everyone's doing okay, finding shelter over there during this very difficult time. So I just hope everyone's doing well over there as best as they can. So, with that being said, this game got moved to Arizona, and the Cardinal Stadium, the State Farm Stadium. So that's where this game's going to be played now. So when you look at the biggest key to victory for both of these teams, for the Vikings, Kevin O'Connell, he has to reignite the running game with Aaron Jones and Cam Akers, because when you look at last game, I don't recall the Vikings running the ball all that much, which can be accounted to Detroit's defense, maybe, but it could also be accounted to Kevin O'Connell deciding not to, having Darnold be a hero. I mean, I don't understand why, because I'm sure Darnold threw it a lot during the regular season, but he also had Aaron Jones run it too to help him counteract the offense. So in this game, he really needs to have Aaron Jones run it more, especially in the red zone, to set up a potential passing touchdown for Sam Darnold, or whether it's to Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison. So I'm not sure why they neglected the running game, but they can't do it here in this win or go home game. Meanwhile, for Matthew Stafford and the offense, like since week 15 against the 49ers, they have only scored less than 20 points, probably even less than that, by the way. And they've been like ice cold. But what's even more concerning is that Stafford is not really connecting with anyone outside of Nacua, which kind of gives me the impression that, does he really trust anyone in that offense right now? And it's just very strange. So they have to hope that the rest in week 18, it helped them so they can have a chance to heat back up. Because if they don't heat back up in this game, in this playoff game, then they're done. They are done in this game. So, the Rams proved they can beat the Vikings, especially with their strong front seven, and if they can heat back up on offense, if Matthew Stafford can rediscover that mid-season streak that the Rams were having, and expose the Vikings' recent red zone weaknesses with the Rams defense, by the way. However, I think the Vikings will rebound from a tough loss in Detroit to steal this first round matchup in Arizona, by the way, and move on to the divisional playoffs. So yeah, I got the Vikings, I got the Bucks, I got the Eagles, I got the Bills, I got the Ravens and I got the Chargers in the first round of Super Wildcard Weekend. Oh, in the playoffs, mind you. So, yeah, those are my playoff picks. That's my filthy casual preview to the playoffs and the 2024-25 NFL playoffs. Yeah, that's your long preview to what's going to go down this weekend. Even though my team's not in it, but I'm still excited for it. I'm still excited for what's to come for these playoffs. And I hope you are too. So let me know who you're going with in the playoffs in the comments below. Let's have a conversation about it at least on YouTube. You can also slide into the DMs on my socials at Very Cold Lasagna. And let me know your predictions, your picks. What's your biggest under the radar key to victory for any of these teams going into this weekend? So let me know all that. Let's have a conversation about it. And yeah, can't wait for the playoffs starting this weekend. So can't wait. But anyway, thank you for tuning into this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I have been your host, Dylan Lasagna. Thank you for tuning into episode number 240 of this icy yet spicy podcast. And until the next one, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And we'll be back with a filthy casual recap of Super Wildcard Weekend in the next episode. But until I see ya, when I see ya in that next episode, peace out.